All right. Hi, everybody. My name's Charlie Culpepper. I'm the Director of Membership and Public Outreach for the National Aquaculture Association. It's great to see a great audience today for our webinar. Before I hand it over to the presenters, just a little housekeeping. Everybody's going to be on mute, video off right now. But as we get going, Barry and Alex are going to do their presentation. Feel free if you have questions at any time, the chat box is working. So you can drop questions in the chat box and we'll get to those. Once the presentation's over, we'll have a full Q&A session. And then also once we get to Q&A, if you want to just unmute yourself and ask questions at that time, we can do that as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and start the webinar. We've got a really interesting kind of unique topic today. I'm excited to hear it myself. And as well, this is kind of a unique webinar because we really work. The National Aquaculture Association is kind of co-hosting this webinar with the Seafood HACCP Alliance and the Association of Food and Drug Officials. So we appreciate them helping us with distribution and pulling this all together. So with that, I'll introduce our two speakers today. Barry Nash is a seafood technology and marketing specialist with North Carolina Sea Grant. Barry is a food scientist and university extension specialist with a strong business acumen in developing new foods for global markets. He develops collaborations across state agencies and nationwide Sea Grant fisheries and aquaculture programs to assist companies with product commercialization, regulatory compliance, manufacturing, and market expansion. Before joining the Sea Grant, he was employed in research and development with ConAgra and Nestle Purina. So during his career in the private sector and with Sea Grant, Barry has helped 16 businesses launch nearly 80 different products. So pretty impressive resume there, Barry. And then also, I'm pleased to introduce our second speaker, Dr. Alex Chiljenko. He's an assistant professor at North Carolina State University. Alex collaborates with academic and industry partners to conduct needs assessment and to develop and distribute science-based seafood safety programming. So he offers workshops in seafood hazard analysis critical control point, or HACCP as we're all familiar with, and sanitation control procedures. He also provides technical services to the seafood industry, including process validation and verification and seafood safety training. Dr. Chijinko's current research interests include enhancing sturgeon caviar production, application of electrolyzed water for oyster pathogen reduction, upcycling smoked salmon waste and value-added processing, and evaluating plasmalogen content in marine organisms. I knew I was going to trip up on that word. So, all right, with that, Barry and Alex, we really appreciate your time today to share your expertise through the NAA's webinar series. And I will hand it over to you. Feel free to share your screen.
Okay, well, it's a pleasure to be with you all today to talk about adding value to aquaculture products. And what I'd like to start off with right now is just a few statistics. They are a bit dated. Footnotes are at the end of the presentation, but they are still relevant today. And this is, I've kept them in here because it's mid part of last decade is when I noticed that people's tastes for food were changing and that there was stronger demand for products that were made closer to home for the consumers who value local foods. But when it comes to local, it still means grown or harvested in my state. And what attracts people to local foods is the perception, and it is a perception that products grown closer to home or processed closer to home are fresher and that they have a higher quality, less chemical contamination than imported products. Consumers conflate quality and safety. For those of us in the food field, we know there's a difference between the two, but consumers continue to select products close to home who value local foods because, again, of the perception of higher quality and safety than products maybe from other states and certainly from overseas. And that a big trend that continues is the authentic place where products are grown or harvested and processed. We did in North Carolina a consumer survey across our state back in 2020 at the request of our seafood industry here to learn what it was that people valued about North Carolina seafood and if there was a demand for North Carolina seafood in communities west of our coast. And what we found is that people were given an opportunity to choose as many different items in this particular question. And among 1,600 people who took the survey, 90% said that they value local foods and growers and processors who produce them because of the safety factor. So once again, safety is a huge value point for local products. They also want to support the livelihoods of growers. The lifestyle and the heritage of growers is a unique selling point to local aquaculture products. Of course, this was a North Carolina survey, so we learned that North Carolina seafood is certainly preferred over imports. But the other motivation for buying local products is that the carbon footprint. People want to buy products that are closer to home in order to reduce damaging impacts to the environment. One thing that we did in this particular survey that was unique is that we came up with 26 buying scenarios where we looked at 4 different attributes and 2 different products, shrimp and flounder. And what we wanted to see is if you give people 3 different locales for shrimp and flounder and provide a sustainability label or not, or a wild caught label or not, and different pricing, how could we determine, what people really think about buying local products? Given these different scenarios, what would be the outcome? And what we learned is that the willingness to pay and pay premium prices for products was highest when you labeled the seafood from North Carolina, and that may be applicable to your state as well. We did have people that showed interest in sustainability labels and wild-caught labels and product of the U.S., but the highest interest in paying a premium price for seafood came when we put a North Carolina label on it. So at this point, I'm going to go back. At this point, when it comes to your businesses, I see 3 particular value points for you, and that is, first of all, is your locale, where you are growing your product, and secondly, it's your biography. Who you are, what you do, and why you got into that business.
Barry, sorry to interrupt, but
Oh,
are you screen sharing?
yeah, isn't it on there?
Sorry, Bear, I was just about to jump in to say the same thing. So
Yeah, I can't see it.
Okay. Well, let me try it again. Is it on now?
see, it's loading up. Okay, and then just go to presentation mode.
I'll do that. Okay, looks like you all can see it now, right?
Good to go.
Okay, my apologies for that. I thought it was already up and running. I don't need to go back and repeat what I just covered, do I?
I'd say forge ahead.
Thank you.
All right.
So anyway, what I was saying here basically was that you've got some value points, which is your locale, your biography, and again, how you handle the product in order to maintain safety. I put this slide up here because a lot of people, when they think of value added, they think of further processed products. But filleted finfish, that's a value addition because according to the USDA, value addition is anything that transforms, in this particular case, seafood into a more marketable state by changing its form, the sensory characteristics of the product, its nutritional content, enhancing the shelf life or the health attributes of that product. And by doing that, you can create product distinctions that allow you more pricing flexibility in the market. And what's allowing new products to become much more available to the public and certainly available to processors in order to manufacture them is new ingredients and manufacturing technologies. And again, when it comes to new products, people are looking not just for convenience, but they're also looking for more flavorful, healthy, and certainly easy to prepare items, whether that be on the go or at home. So when it comes to prepared foods, there are really 2 types, general categories, and that's the ready to cook category, which might be an oyster dressing or a crab cake or a ready-to-heat item, something that's already been fully cooked by a processor but only needs to be reheated in the home in order to make it edible. And then the ready-to-eat product, like a crab dip or a shrimp salad that doesn't need any further processing by the consumer. They can eat it right out of the package. So this is a composite that I've put together of a particular core customer, somebody who values local foods, and it might be somebody that you'd want to take a look at. But again, everybody's core customers are going to be different depending on, where they're located and the communities that surround them. But in general, the type of person that likes and prioritizes buying local food tend to be college educated. They may be living closer to urban areas than rural areas, and they have this disposable income to pay for seafood because let's face it, seafood tends to be generally a little more expensive than beef, pork, and poultry products, and also a little less available than those terrestrial proteins. They are definitely health conscious people. They're concerned about the environment. They value authenticity and labeling, and they are very active researchers of their food options online. And when I get questions about, well, what kind of products do you think people would want? Because there are so many different products out on the marketplace. I always like to refer people back to a theory that I learned in school, which came out of Harvard Business School, which is the theory of jobs to be done, that says that consumers hire products to do particular jobs in specific circumstances. They are looking for products that will help them make progress in areas where they are struggling to achieve in certain circumstances. And for seafood, that's basically, we'll say, the kitchen. How am I going to prepare a meal at home with seafood and do it in a way that makes me feel competent and that it's going to be enjoyed by my family or my friends. And you want to make sure that you're targeting the right audience with the right product that's going to help them do that. And successful product development is going to match identifiable consumer problems with cost competitive solutions to those problems. So I can't stress enough here that when we're talking about new products, we have to be looking at, first of all, a core consumer who has a need for a seafood product, and then to understand what kind of needs, wants, and expectations they have for that product so that we can tailor that item to meet those needs, wants, and expectations and get repeat sales. So these are just a few of the items that we have worked on for industry here in North Carolina. In terms of the core customer, again, these are items or characteristics that these folks share. When it comes to new products, they are looking for clean labels, meaning they don't want to see any ingredients on a label that looks foreign to them. For instance, artificial preservatives like BHA or BHT. Nobody knows what butylated hydroxytoluene is, except for somebody that's a food technologist and understands that that's a preservation agent. Again, they're looking for locally sourced. They want their food sources to be sustainable, environmentally friendly, minimally processed. That's a general consideration, but the best example I can give you here is the difference between a refrigerated or a frozen soup in the refrigerated frozen category versus shelf-stable foods like Campbell's canned soups. People are looking for something that they consider to be minimally processed because, again, they consider the quality of the product to be higher. Protein is in. It's considered good for building muscle, but it's also thought to enhance metabolism, and it's thought to reduce weight. Healthy fats and oils, soybean oil, olive oils, canola oils that are monosaturated, polysaturated as opposed to saturated fats. People are looking for very, very interesting flavors. Italian, Mexican, and Asian seem to be the big three that people are looking at in terms of ethnic cuisines. They desire easy when buying and preparing meals at home. And organic and gluten-free tend to be secondary considerations when they are looking at labels. So before you get into this business, again, I have to come back to the safety parameter or the safety value point. you really have to have some programs under your belt and before you get into this business, because there are rules and regulations at the state and federal level you're going to have to follow in order to make sure that you're not producing adulterated food that might make a consumer sick or worse. The first thing is good manufacturing practices. And we have these resources at the end of the presentation too. So the good manufacturing practices really cover sanitation characteristics across a plant environment. If you want to think about this in terms of a triangle, this would be the foundation of that triangle. You start with very general characteristics that cover the plant from the time products are received to the time they go out the door. And then that's followed up on the second layer by sanitation control processing procedures, which are checklists to make sure that you're meeting at least 8 key sanitation points that are required by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, such as the safety of the water, condition and cleanliness of food contact surfaces, the maintenance of hand washing and hand sanitizing and toilet facilities for your employees, keeping non-seafood ingredients away from the food processing area, labeling toxic chemicals and keeping them out of the processing area while production is going on, the health conditions of your employees, and a pest control program to make sure that you don't have any rodents or bugs that are infesting your facility. These must be monitored on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. And there's a separate training program offered by AFTO and the Seafood HACCP Alliance that can help you develop these kinds of safety programs or sanitation program monitoring programs for your business. And then the top layer here would be HACCP, hazard analysis and control point monitoring, where you are conducting a hazard analysis of your business, looking at the inherent safety issues, biological, chemical, and physical hazard that are associated with the raw materials that you're working with the final product, and then setting up a plan to look at where your critical control points are in the process that you're going to have to do monitoring to ensure that the products remain within particular upper or lower limits or within ranges to make sure that the product remains safe as it's being processed. And then there are record-keeping requirements that you have to do to make sure that over time, as you look at your records, that your processes are remaining under your control so that the product going out the door remains safe to the consumer. So this diagram here explains basically the product development process, because the people that I have worked with in the past don't seem to understand that we are moving a product from the benchtop or the kitchen area up to mass production. And there are certain steps that you have to go through in order to make sure that the product that you've developed on the benchtop maintains the sensory characteristics on the production level. At the same time, you're making sure that as you process that product, you're paying attention to vulnerabilities in that process where the product may be at risk for biological, chemical, and physical hazards. And so we start at what I consider to be the concept, the product concept, which you can get from commercial buyers, trade magazines, or just from talking to particular customers. And then what you want to do is develop and refine a recipe on the benchtop and do some consumer evaluations that can be in company just to get a feel for how acceptable it is to your customers, to your employees, before you move further with scaling it up to the production level. When you get to the production level, you're looking at doing some identifying critical ingredients that can help you do better processing on a mass scale. You're refining that formulation so that it's more processable, but it still retains the desirable sensory characteristics that you developed at the benchtop level. And as you continue to do your production trials, you're doing continual sensory work to make sure the product is still retains its desirable sensory characteristics and it's acceptable to the consumer, and bacterial tests to make sure that that product is, again, not picking up any spoilage or certainly any pathogenic bacteria that can make the product unsafe at your facility or in distribution. And then you're doing your hazard analyses after you finalize that product to, again, look at vulnerabilities in your product and in your process to make sure that you've got that process under control so that the product remains safe to the consumer once it gets out into commercial markets. You're also doing labeling, looking at nutrition labels and doing a regulatory review to make sure that the label meets state and federal rules for transparency and disclosure. And then the market introduction, where you have develop a brand for those products or a product line, sales brochures, and any internet advertising that you're going to do. And so this process can take anywhere, I don't know, from 3 to 6 months up to a year, depending on the kind of product that you're trying to make, or certainly the type of markets you're trying to get your product into. So what I want to do is just give an example here, and Alex will follow me with another example, but of a ready-to-eat item that the Seafood Lab and North Carolina Sea Grant developed for a local processor. They wanted to develop a series of, or a line of ready-to-eat seafood salads and dips. And so the product that I want to just kind of showcase here is tuna salad. And the first thing that we need to be concerned about, and I'm not going to go into too much detail here because, again, we have training materials or resources for you at the end of the presentation, but the kinds of things that we had to think about when we were putting this product together. These items were developed by one of the processor's wives because she had a catering business and she wanted to see these scaled up for commercial production. And so because it's tuna, we had to be concerned about the histamine hazard, which is a chemical hazard, because with scumbroid fish like tuna, they tend to, once they are deceased, there are spoilage bacteria on the product that will convert histidine into histamine. And once histamine is produced in the meat, then it cannot be removed by cooking or freezing. And that's a hazard for people who are sensitive to histamine. So the way to control this product is going to be basically, or to control the hazard of histamine, is through temperature control. So again, making sure that product, once it's received, was below a certain temperature, or it was properly iced to make sure that the product was kept cold after the point of capture. Here, what we have here is an employee trying to remove the loins out of the carcasses. At this point, we were very concerned about sanitation here, making sure that the food contact surfaces were thoroughly cleaned before they started the processing here, and making sure that there's no rust or dirt or anything on the tabletops, and that the employees are using gloves to make sure that they don't contaminate the product with additional spoilage or certainly with pathogenic bacteria. And then this particular processor was using vacuum packaging to pack the loins in. At this particular step, we have to be concerned about Clostridium botulinum type E, which is the marine organism, which can start growing as low as 38 degrees Fahrenheit. So in an environment where there is no oxygen, this particular organism can germinate and grow and produce a toxin. So the way we control that is making sure that that product is thoroughly iced, maybe even kept under refrigeration to keep the temperature below 38 degrees. And there are records that you need to keep to ensure that you're processing at this step properly. One thing that you will definitely have to have in your HACCP plan if you're cooking any kind of seafood for a product you're making is to make sure that your product has your process, your time and temperature process has been properly validated by a process authority. And in this state, that's the North Carolina State Seafood Lab. What you're seeing here in these trays are temperature monitors that were strategically placed in these pans to ensure that when the product went into the ovens and was cooked, that we could definitely confirm or not that the ovens were properly processing that product so that it would be safe to eat, because again, this is a ready-to-eat product for the consumer. So after cooking, that product is moved from the trays into an Nalgene container, again, that's been washed and sanitized to make sure that we are not inadvertently contaminating that product with spoilage or pathogenic bacteria. And then it was placed in cooler storage And here I'm just going to bring in some information from ServSafe that I used to teach, and that is we want to make sure that the product, once it's cooked, gets to within 2 hours about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm sorry, that it gets to a temperature of 70 degrees Fahrenheit within 2 hours, and then within 4 hours, it gets to 41 or below. That ensures that the product is properly cooled and prevents any bacteria that might be on the product from growing. Dicing those tuna steaks, again, there isn't a particular safety hazard here other than to make sure that you've got proper sanitation in place so that the equipment was cleaned and sanitized before you started the dicing process. And then there's another cook step, and this is for the macaroni. Again, sanitation is key here. There isn't a particular hazard or biological or chemical or physical hazard with the macaroni, but you do want to make sure that the product has been properly cooked and is being handled in a way that makes it controls safety issues. And then it comes to the non-seafood ingredients for this particular item. I have worked with people that have gotten ingredients out of gardens, and once we start doing some shelf life microbiological tests, their aerobic plate counts go sky high within a couple of days. So what we wanted to do here was to get our ingredients from a Cisco or a US food service because they've taken care of that safety hazard and they've produced those products in the market form that we want, which eliminates a processing step. And then we did the blending here. Again, at the blending step, it only took about 5 to 8 minutes to blend the seafood and the non-seafood ingredients together. What's critical here is, again, is the sanitation, making sure that we're working with equipment that's stainless steel and that it's been properly washed and sanitized before we add food to it. And then the last step here is the packaging, where we're placing it in plastic gen packs, 8-ounce containers. And here we have to be concerned about allergen control because this particular product used soybean oil in order to provide a little more moistness to the tuna meat because it dries out very quickly. Also, we had mayonnaise in the product, and mayonnaise contains egg, and that has to be declared on the label. And then, of course, this is a tuna salad, so we had to declare that, there was a fish allergen in this product, and that has to be on the label so that the people who have to stay away or abstain from these particular items are aware that they're in the product so that they don't buy it. So I'm going to stop sharing here and I'm going to turn this presentation now over to Alex.
Almost there. Okay. Now, can everybody see it all right?
Looks great, Alex.
Okay, thank you. All right, thanks a lot, Barry. That was a really good overview of how ideas get to the market, and you had some good examples as well. Touched on safety topics, and I'll do some of that in a more condensed form, um, more in the vein of how a researcher looks at product development and how we do research on some of the various topics that we work on in the seafood lab, which may not entail detailed HACCP plans at this point, but for industry partners that may pick up the idea or the product, they would do more of that legwork. But I'll just go into one example, mainly of a product that we've developed in the seafood lab that deals with industry collaboration and upcycling seafood byproducts. So a lot of, or most of what Barry said, it also applies to product development from seafood byproducts. It um, doesn't have to be the typical fillets that folks are working with. It can be offcuts. It can be things like the finfish processing byproducts uh, or the shellfish processing byproducts. And a lot of what seafood processing is working with the byproducts, since 50 to 80% of the raw materials are wasted at the end of the day. A good example of this, even more so, is crawfish, which the edible portion, the tail portion, is only about 15% tail meat from the whole weight of the crawfish. But there are other ways to utilize byproducts from small crawfish, which are being done at LSU, making like a crawfish mincemeat, for example, and then making products with that, or also with the shell waste as well. And I'll go into why some of these things are very effective and some ideas which may not be effective and industrially applicable without more development. So these byproducts are typically generated in different ways. I know some of this, such as bycatch and onboard processing, it's not aquaculture related, but even so, a lot of byproducts are generated through aquaculture as well, since the raw materials are of those same consistencies, whether it's finfish or shellfish products. And what you see in this image here on the left image is smoked salmon skins. On the middle image, it's smoked salmon trimmings, which contain offcuts and some gray meat, which is very fatty. Both the skins and the trimmings are very fatty cuts. And these are aquacultured byproducts that are produced from a company called Acme Smoked Fish, who is the largest smoked fish producer in North America. And we're very lucky to have them as a collaborator. And they have a facility in North Carolina, in Wilmington, among other facilities in New York, Massachusetts, and Florida. So that's the product I'll be talking about, something that we did with them as a collaboration. And if you're wondering what this off-putting thing on the right is, it's called a sea squirt, which is actually a biofouling organism that attaches to oyster cages. So when oysters are being cultured, um, whether in typically in floating cages, this is a larger issue. The sea squirt attaches to the oyster cages and it kind of sucks up resources around the oysters and prevents optimal growing. So the oyster harvesters, oyster growers have to remove this organism from the cages every so often, but it is typically just goes back in the environment. However, we're also doing research on this organism alongside others to see what Charlie was talking about in my introduction at the end, is to see how much plasmalogen content is in this organism. And this is a type of phospholipid which has been related with potentially treating neurodegenerative disease. So not so much food product, but kind of like a potentially a supplement or a biomedical product. And of course, other byproducts are generated from this, which can be a food product, since there's protein and carbohydrates and other things available within all of these samples, which can be utilized. So it just depends on how you process it and what you're looking to make in the end. Moving on to more examples of byproduct utilization for food, we have here on the on the left, things we've worked on in my lab, which is making crackers with smoked salmon skins inside of the cracker. So getting high quality protein and fats and other micronutrients inside of the cracker, like fortifying the cracker. And we haven't done official sensory testing on it, but it looks promising in terms of what we can put in there while still having a similar taste to the original flavor of the cracker. It just has a little bit of a darker color, of course, from the skins. And in the middle, to the right of that, we have a type of chip or air fried product that we've made with the smoked salmon skins as well. This one has been more difficult to develop due to the nature of the smoked salmon skin, which I'll touch on in a few slides. It's very oily. Unlike salmon skins without the smoking process, where the smoking removes a lot of water and a lot of oil is brought out and concentrated. So that's it's kind of hard to work with for various applications, but we've tried that. And in addition to these food applications, uh, in general for seafood byproducts processing or many parts of fish and shellfish, you can see in this diagram on the right, you can have a lot of industries involved in sourcing ingredients from the byproducts, including things like supplements. Gelatin is a big one. Collagen. Um, I know it's not on here, but chitosan from the shells, chitin, uh, different enzymes. Of course, we're familiar with fish oil and various canned products, dried fish heads or even fish head soup, things like shoe leather. There's a lot of things that can be done, but it really depends on the logistics of the process and uh, the various cost cost to scalability to safety to sustainability opportunities. There are a lot of different challenges and opportunities that go along with developing these types of products. Personally, for my research and my extension work with my group, we've kind of stayed away from um, going too in depth on processes that are not food related. So things like developing the um, chitin and chitosan from shells, for example, it can be a very involved process that can also generate a lot of byproducts, or co-products from that process. So I'd rather work with byproducts that can be fully incorporated into foods or animal feed, which is a lot simpler of a process and probably more cost effective. The issue of scalability, yield of target compounds, and end product consistency comes into play. Thinking about, for example, if you have a large scale process, how are you going to get all of your shrimp shells if you're looking to make chitin or chitosan? How are you going to get those shrimp shells from various docks or producers, processors? How is that feasible? You need refrigeration, perhaps you need drying processes. There's a lot of things to consider, which are safety related as well as cost related, not to mention what Barry talked about with market and consumer acceptance. So, other than that, there's sustainability, which is always something to think about, environmental impact, population health impact, whether your process causes causes waste runoff that can be unbeneficial, or other considerations as well that can have socioeconomic impacts. So there's a lot of things to consider at different points of the product development process. As I mentioned, I prefer to from this figure donate or upcycle that uh, quadrant of this figure. I prefer that in addition to animal feed versus going into more complex processes that generate more byproducts. Um, Composting or anaerobic digestion or making fertilizer, things like that, it can be an option that's better than just throwing away byproducts or sending them to the landfill, which is actually a lot of what still goes on. So there are different levels of what's better, what's worse. And I think this food scale kind of gives a good overview of it. So, of course, preventing waste is ideal, but that's not always possible depending on the product that you're trying to make. There's going to be co-products for many different processes. So going into the project that that we collaborated with Acme Smoked Fish on is producing a type of smoked salmon boudin sausage from their byproducts, namely their trimming waste that they produce on the trimming line rather than using the skins. So this trimming waste is a high quality byproduct which comes from various cuts that they term as, for example, trim 5, which cuts deeper into the gray meat, or trim 7, which is a cut that's closer to the loin. So depending on the types of cuts, they have various stakeholders that they sell these trimmings to, and the skins as well. So going into how much, it's around 60 tons of smoked salmon byproducts, including the trimming, skins, pin bones, and collars, generated just at their Wilmington facility. And they typically sell a sizable amount of the trimmings, at least for animal feed or human food, to stakeholders, but the rest is currently sent to landfills, and this includes most of their skins. So that's a big deal, which they wanted to collaborate with us on. What can we develop or help develop as a product to prevent sending so much waste to landfills, especially since their byproducts contain so much high quality protein and lipids, and they actually taste really good once they're put in the proper format. So the trimmings, as you can see, have around 18% protein and a very high amount of lipids, as I mentioned, which can be a hindrance for product development. How do we utilize all of these lipids without making a bunch of other byproducts from the process? Like if we wanted to, for example, use a press or a centrifuge to separate the lipids from the solids. If we want to add water to that process to make separation more efficient, you're generating more byproducts from that process. And the yields also have to be taken into account. So there's a lot of different factors when you think about how do I work with this byproduct with these very high lipid contents compared to a traditional salmon fillet, which isn't smoked and it has more water in it. So it has a bit less protein and lipid content. So for our project with Acme, we've chosen boudin as a good outlet for their byproducts. And boudin is traditionally made from pork meat and liver, as well as other byproducts, rice, vegetables, and seasonings. It is cooked typically by steam cooking after being stuffed into a casing. And this is typically a pork casing, but collagen casings and other casings have been utilized as well. It originally originated in France, the idea using fresh pig's blood, if you can believe that. So it was brought to Louisiana through the French, and it's a very popular dish right now, even. Not just pork versions, but various seafood versions. There's um, boudin from crawfish, which personally I find very tasty. So going into the various challenges and things we've done during the product development process, I keep mentioning the high oil content, and that coincides with a high cook loss. So in general, we chose boudin because it has kind of natural built-in binders that can bind up the oil in the rice and the vegetables. It can absorb or bind the oil. And some of our research has focused on utilizing other binders to have even less of a cook loss, which more cook loss for the producer means you're losing out on product which can be sold. So we want to bind up as much oil and water as possible. So things like carrot fiber, flaxseed meal, and cornstarch, we've tried out for binders in this boudin product. We've also made a meat emulsion with high shear processing. I'll show you the equipment in future slides, but this meat emulsion is basically chopping up the meat very rapidly at a high RPMs, and this forms an emulsion, kind of binding the oil with the protein, as well as reducing the particle size in the process. And if done properly at a low temperature, um, it can kind of form a very tacky exudate mixture on the outside of the meat. And this can be a very beneficial texture for sausage making in general. And this can help with the next portion, which is the boudin was prone to falling apart. We first used a collagen casing, which was frequently breaking. So an easy fix to that was going with the hog casing or pork casing. And ingredients were not sticking together well. So that could be due to many factors, but the type of rice, even the ingredient sourcing can be a big deal in how the functionality of the ingredient turns out. So we switched to jasmine rice. I think we're using basmati rice initially. So the different grain sizes, cooking the vegetables before mixing versus using raw vegetables that can help with the water holding absorption as well. So there are a lot of factors to look at when developing products like this. And here was our process. We initially cooked vegetables and rice, then chilled all of those, and we had an experimental design where we compared various binders that I mentioned, as well as the emulsion sausages, which were processed a little bit differently. So grinding, traditionally the salmon byproducts, you would just put through a grinder, but the emulsion making with the salmon byproducts, it would be at a higher RPM and a more specialized equipment. So this process used the same ingredients for the most part, just different processing steps. And after all that, we stuffed it into a pork casing, steamed until the internal temperature reached 71 degrees Celsius or 160 Fahrenheit, chilled the sausages, vacuum packed, and froze the product. And so that was our main process. And from this, I would ask, what are the potential hazards? And this is something you should ask when developing a product and looking at your process. What could be the hazards? What could be the hazards that are initially present, and where could hazards be introduced? So a big part of this product development is the cold chain. So just keeping the cold chain throughout, keeping everything chilled down, even during the grinding and chopping steps, keeping everything cooled down, not only for the safety aspects, but for the quality of what I mentioned with having that protein being kind of extruded from the mixing or chopping process. So the myofibrillar protein extraction, which forms a better, more tacky meat substance that holds together better to be able to form more cohesive sausages after cooking and storage as well. So cold chain, a mixing of the ingredients, sourcing of the ingredients, the pork casing is something to consider as well, which is the rationale for cooking until reaching that internal temperature of 160 Fahrenheit versus cooking until, let's say, 145, typically for seafood. So other than that, the vacuum packaging, as Barry mentioned, it introduces a risk of Clostridium botulinum toxin formation. So this in our process is mitigated by freezing and frozen storage, but it's something to always consider, especially for refrigerated products and shelf-stable products like beef or jerkies, for example. And something that Barry mentioned, allergens. So seafood or fish is an allergen, so that would have to be designated at the labeling step. So a lot of different things to consider when developing a product. Processing technology to make the boudin. This was our low-tech option, which we used for the addition of binders. So testing the binders versus the emulsion method. To add the binders, we just went through the process I mentioned in the previous slide, and we used a KitchenAid mixer after grinding. We mixed all the ingredients up in the KitchenAid mixer. Then we used pork casings in our sausage stuffer that's on the right. And after stuffing into the casings, we cooked it here with steam cooking on the bottom left. So it's a kind of a low-tech, small-scale type process. But for us in research development, it's very useful to start with the small-scale process to not waste a lot of product and be able to test a lot of different formulations. Going into our more high-tech development for the emulsion sausage, this device on the top left is a vacuum sausage stuffer. So this is industry equipment that's typically utilized to have a more efficient sausage in the casing. And what I mean by that is less air pockets. It eliminates air pockets, so you have more product that can be stuffed into the casing, and the throughput is much higher. And the bottom left and the middle pictures are the chopper that we use to make the emulsion sausage. And this chopper, as you can see, it can make a very fine paste type mixture with the smoked salmon. So that was actually very beneficial in our studies in reducing the cook loss. It was the most effective in reducing cook loss compared to our control sausage without binders. So it had the lowest cook loss just due to a processing step that we implemented versus adding various ingredients or changing the formulation. But either one can be applied depending on the equipment you have access to and your process. And on the right here, we have a smoker cabinet, which can be used not only to heat and cook the sausage, but it has humidity controls as well. So like the previous slide I showed with the low tech, you're not really controlling humidity there. It's going to be saturated with humidity. But this cabinet, which is more industrial equipment, you can control things like that and have an easier time validating your process. So once we finished making this smoked salmon boudin, based on our calculation at a small scale, it cost about $1 to make per pound. And this tells us it has high potential as an affordable sausage product. And when comparing it to something like crawfish boudin, just that we found as a Louisiana product, you can see the distribution of calories is a bit higher, has a little bit higher protein, a lower carbohydrates, and a lot higher fats. So, due to the composition of what we put in there with the smoked salmon being so oily, but also having a higher protein content, these nutritional aspects make sense. And our next step will be to do a formal sensory panel analysis. And this can be very useful, especially before going deep into the product development process to tell us, would this product even be applicable for consumers? Would they want to buy this product? And this goes into the next slide of the market questions, or who will be your primary consumers and why? What the consumer needs and wants. Does the product satisfy it? For example, this product that we're working on is a heat and serve product. So it's already fully cooked, but it's frozen. So it just needs to be heated up by the consumer and served. So that's something to consider when you're asking these questions is how will the consumer use the product? What is it offering that competing products do not? The cost of the product, which we covered roughly. Where will you sell your product, whether it's direct to consumer, retail, or in restaurants? And how will you promote your product is also important, especially with nowadays social media being so prevalent in the success of many businesses. And related to the consumer sensory panels, as well as things like focus groups. The Seafood Lab collaborated with Barry and NC Grant to develop extension programming for the seafood industry that deals with these aspects and how the seafood industry can actually conduct focus groups and get consumer insights. So we, a few summers ago, worked with various university students that are co-authors on this blueprint, so to say, for the industry. We did a focus group with a local company and with their product, and we got consumer feedback and we learned how to uh, kind of make this process applicable for companies that want to do focus groups or sensory testing, maybe at the same time even. And it may not be affordable to do for some small scale processors. So we came out with this programming to help them to be able to do this in their own facilities with consumers or with others and get a better idea of what the market is looking for and if their product is will serve the market well. And there's different seafood safety and product development resources which folks that have aquaculture products can go to, and I would recommend going to, especially if you don't have prior training and things like seafood HACCP. So Cornell's Institute for Food Safety, it helps with the prerequisite programs like good manufacturing practices, sanitation control procedures, and seafood HACCP can be reached at the Association of Food and Drug Officials website with seafood HACCP participant information available, whether you want to take a sanitation class or a seafood HACCP class, or even become a seafood trainer. It's available at the AFTA website. And the steering committee there is developing constantly, looking at the programming for HACCP and seeing what needs to be changed and what is good, what needs to be done for the future. So the preventive controls for human foods, we have the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliances, or FSPCA, which is also a great resource. The Seafood Network Information Center, it gives a lot of seafood safety information and by request as well. It's hosted by Oregon State University, so you can ask any question related to seafood safety or maybe even product development, and they can help you out with that. My lab, the NC State Seafood Lab, we welcome any and all questions regarding product development and seafood safety. We have a website as well. And the NC State Entrepreneur Initiative for Food, or EI4F, they help with all kinds of business development, as well as acidified foods training, if you have a product that fits that. And also labeling, so creating nutrition labels. EI4F can do that for you as well. And I'll turn it over to Barry to talk more about NC Grant resources.
Thanks, Alex. At Sea Grant, we have done a number of case studies in product development and also put up on our website different marketing resources that you all can look at that might be applicable to your business. So if you went to North Carolina Sea Grant and you went to the topics section and clicked on fisheries and aquaculture, we do have information on the seafood economic impact study that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. that talks about the kinds of things that people value about products that they value and why they value them. We've also put up there producer resources, some of the resources that Alex has already covered. And that also includes the case studies that we did on product development. So we've done a number of products here in the state, and these case studies give you an overview of, the thought process that went into translating a product concept into an actual marketable product. And then the consumer resources that we've developed give people an overview, the general public, an overview of our industry. What products do we produce in this state? Where are they at? Where are they available? And also handling information at the home, because again, a lot of food-borne illnesses are precipitated by mishandling in the home. So we've given consumers information on where they can get more details on how to properly store seafood and making sure that there's no cross-contamination between raw product and cooked product. And then what we learned in the economic impact study too was that consumers don't necessarily always want heat and serve items or ready to eat items. They just want products that help them facilitate but not eliminate the joy they get in cooking. They really want proper guidance in the way they can cook seafood at home. And so we have another resource called Mariner's Menu. It lists over 310 different seafood recipes that another extension agent here at Sea Grant developed over a 30-year career. Some of those have been refined and added to by a curator that we've hired to work on this site part-time. So there are a variety of different types of recipes that also I have used with the industry to generate ideas for new products for the commercial markets. So those are on our website for you to take a look at and get a feel for some of the work that we've done here that might be useful to you wherever your location is. And Alex, I'll let you take it from there.
That's all I got. Yeah, thank y'all.
All right. Well, Barry and Alex, that was a really fantastic presentation. I appreciate the lots of photos and great information. I think I'm mostly just hungry now. So, Alex, I'm based out of Mississippi. So if you want to send me a pallet of that salmon boudin, I could sell it left and right around here. So, well, folks, with that, I know we're a little bit over time, but we've got a lot of folks on still. So feel free to start dropping your questions into the chat box. You can also use the raise your hand feature at the bottom of your toolbar there, and we can take you off mute if you want to just speak up and ask a question directly. So we have one already in the chat box, and this one is, how is North Carolina seafood product development work funded?
Well, until recently, it was funded through a North Carolina Fishery Resource Grant program that we used to have, and about a decade ago, that was done away with. And then we also have the Community Collaborative Grant Program where someone from the community partners with someone in extension or in the university like Alex, and we work on projects that answer particular questions. So we have used both of those funds in order to develop products and create these case studies that I just mentioned that we put on our website. So we've done this not only to help the industry, but also to develop teaching materials for other people that are interested in getting into this category.
Okay. We don't have any other questions right now, so I'll go ahead and toss one out. Before I do, Alex or Barry, could one of you drop the Sea Grant Resources webpage link into the chat box for everybody? I think that'd be awesome to share. And
Sure.
I'll be sure to include that in the recorded news release too for this webinar. One question I was thinking about, it's a big step for aquaculture farms to build a brick and mortar processing plant and really get involved with this. Barry, can you talk a little bit about options for like working with an already existing custom processor if farmers want to try something out but not make a major capital investment?
Yeah, product development, I mean, it can provide you a consistent revenue stream if you do it right, but it is time intensive and it's infrastructure intensive too. And so what I've talked to people who are interested in North Carolina and doing product development is before you really start before you know, you have a product that's going to sell well, and you don't want to just do one product. You want to do a line of products. Is work with somebody who already has a processing facility. They fall under rules and regulations for safety. They have a network, a distribution network that you can tap into. And so work with them to do the scaling, to produce the product, and then you're going to handle the marketing and distribution from there. That way, you can test the market out for the particular product that you're doing, and see if it's going to be successful, or if it's not doing well, what can you do to tweak the product or the distribution or the marketing in order to get more consumer awareness of it. And if you see that your product line is growing and that it's profitable, then you might want to consider bringing it under your own house and creating your own production facility. But I always believe in testing the market out by using somebody else's equipment before I commit more resources of my own.
Awesome. How would you recommend folks like identify one of those custom processors? Is there a resource available, or just contact some you guys or extension folks?
Well, in North Carolina, we through the NC State Seafood Lab and the Department of Food Bioprocessing and Nutrition Sciences, they have a list of people that they have researched over time who are might be potential processors that can develop products on behalf of another processor. So I don't know about other states. I just know in this one that, we have a list of people that people can consider and give a call and do some research before they, choose somebody that they want to work with more intimately on a new product or a product line.
Okay. Let's see. We got another question in the chat box. I've heard of some
I
oyster.
would like to say one other thing. Somebody
Right.
could just put in Google and say custom seafood processors. That might be another way to look for processors in different parts of the country that they would want to take a look at.
Okay. So next question is, I've heard of some oyster growers in my state applying to the USDA value-added processing grant on the merit of their product being local without having any added ingredients. Have you heard of anyone getting granted by the value-added processing grant just by producing a local product?
Local. No, I have not. What I have seen of those value-added producer grants, first of all, they are a challenge to put together. But the second thing is that we've always been working with people that I haven't worked with oyster growers, but processors that are working with different types of market forms, maybe a little bit of ready to eat products, but nothing like that. But that doesn't mean that if it's covered by the grant, then why not? But these grants are not easy to handle yourself. It really is helpful if you can find somebody that has experience writing these grants. And we have had that at the Department of Agriculture in North Carolina.
All right, well, don't be shy, folks. This is your chance. We've got two seafood processing experts here. In the meantime, too, I'll just say I was chatting with Barry and Alex a little bit. I think we've gotten a lot of interest in this processing topic, and we will probably be teasing up. We'll do some future NA webinars on other processing topics. So if you have any ideas or specific needs that you want Barry or Alex maybe to cover in a future webinar, shoot us an email, naa@nationalaquaculture.org. I'd be glad to hear your thoughts, so we can kind of improve the output of these webinars moving forward, too. There we go. Are there any national meetings that focus on seafood value-added product development?
I never heard of a national meeting for that, but the Institute of Food Technologists does have a subgroup of people who work in product development. And for somebody who's interested in that, you might, if you're not a member of IFT, consider joining and get into that group, because that is a great network of people that can not only give you the technical expertise, but maybe can connect you with people in the industry if you're interested in testing a product out, doing some production trials in a plant, for instance.
I would
All right, we
also
got.
say
Oh, go ahead.
we just had the annual Aquatic Foods Conference in New Orleans this past week. So that's one resource as a national conference that focuses on many aspects of seafood, including aquaculture and value-added product development. So I would check out the website for Aquatic Foods Conference, and the Pacific Fisheries Technologists Conference as well, which is kind of like the sister conference, but on the West Coast. So Aquatic Food Conference for more East Coast and Gulf, and Pacific Fisheries Technologists Conference for the West Coast.
Excellent. Okay, got a shellfish question here. Would shellfish coming from wet storage be considered a value-added product? For hard clams, it increases the shelf life, purges grit, and produces ready-to-cook product.
Yeah, I mean, that falls under the USDA definition of value addition if it increases the shelf life and gets rid of grit, certainly.
Yeah, if it's any kind of processing, then yes.
The one more. Would shellfish coming from wet storage? Oh no, we've got that one already. It's just a duplicate. So back to non-seafood ingredients. Sorry, why would you get chopped onion from Cisco versus chopping onions?
Because that is an additional processing step. All right. So if you can get your individual ingredients in a processed form where you can eliminate labor in chopping, raw onions, for instance, if you can get it from a process that's already done it, then you basically are condensing your production and it saves you money. That's what it really came right down to. Two things is we wanted to be able to eliminate a processing step because it's tedious work. The other thing is that the company is already taking care of doing the safety work on those products too. So that's something that the processor doesn't have to worry about as well. There is a bit of an upcharge, but you need to balance that out with what would the labor be if you were going to do it yourself. I work with people here that they don't necessarily have enough processing equipment to dice onions or tomatoes or celery or things of that nature, so they have to do it by hand. So in order to cut costs, we went to Cisco and US Food Service. But if you can afford the equipment to do that yourself, then and it does not create, additional upcharge on your production costs, then consider doing that too.
From experience with the product I talked about, where we used bell peppers and onions and things like that, it's definitely worth it to get the prepackaged stuff. It's a big time saver, and it helps a lot with consistency and safety of the product.
Great questions and answers there. Well, I guess we'll take one more question if anybody wants to drop one in. And in the meantime, I'll just say, Barry and Alex, thanks again for donating your expertise and time to do an NA webinar. This was really fantastic. Our next webinar is going to be on July 16th. We've got the Freshwater Institute is going to be talking about research and opportunities for U.S. recirculating aquaculture. So be sure to tune in, look for that announcement soon. If you'd like to share this, we're recording this webinar. It'll go out on our webpage, nationalaquaculture.org. You can find it in the news section on the left-hand menu there. And we'll also add some of these resource links that Barry and Alex mentioned there. And let's see. Okay, I don't think we have any more final questions, so we'll close it out with that. And I would just say, finally, I'd encourage everybody, please join the National Aquaculture Association. We provide our webinars free to the public as a service of what our association does. But whether you're a farmer, a supplier, or a public servant, academic, extension, or a student, we really want you to join our association and get on board and engage with us. So we're 100% funded by our membership dues, and we'd really appreciate your contribution. And with that, I think we'll close out the webinar for the day. I hope everybody has a great rest of their week.
Thank you for the opportunity to present these product concepts to your audience.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Julie. Thanks,
Take care,
everybody.
everybody. Bye-bye.